Today, we're diving into one of history's all-time greatest military blunders, the Athenian invasion of Sicily. It's an incredible story of overconfidence, of really flawed leadership, and just catastrophic failure. And honestly, it's a timeless lesson in how even the mightiest powers can become the architects of their very own ruin.
It's a question that really echoes through history, right? For Athens, which was the dominant naval power of the 5th century BC, the answer lies in a single disastrous decision. A decision that was fueled by immense wealth and just completely unchecked ambition.
So, where did it all start? Well, it began with money, an almost unimaginable amount of it. At the start of the Peloponnesian War, Athens had 6,000 talents of coined silver just sitting in its treasury. To put that in perspective, that's like having billions of dollars today. It was a war chest that made the city feel absolutely invincible.
But as the great Athenian statesman Pericles warned, the real danger wasn't some external enemy. Nope. The real threat was internal. It was Athens' own pride, its own political divisions, and its own flawed judgment that would, in the end, be its undoing. So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with that massive wealth. Then we'll meet the two rival leaders who basically sealed Athens' fate, dissect the insane gamble to invade Sicily, witness the catastrophe itself, and finally look at the absolutely devastating aftermath.
Okay, so to really understand how Athens could even consider such a risky move, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of its wealth. This wasn't just confidence. It was a feeling of invulnerability that was born from just piles and piles of treasure. Before the war even started, the city had merged its own treasury with that of its allies in the Delian League. This created a colossal reserve that, at its peak, reached 9,700 talents of silver, all of it stored right there on the Acropolis. And this wasn't just idle cash, This mountain of silver was the engine of Athenian power. It's what paid for the incredible Parthenon. It funded the navy that completely dominated the seas, and it bankrolled all their military campaigns. And it was constantly being refilled by tribute from its so-called allies. So the fate of all this money, and really the empire itself, rested on a city that was deeply divided. And that division was perfectly embodied by two powerful men with completely opposite visions for Athens. This right here is the internal flaw that Pericles was so afraid of. I mean, the contrast between these two leaders could not be more stark. On one side, you've got Nicias. He's wealthy, deeply religious, a total conservative. People respected him for his caution, but he was often paralyzed by indecision. And on the other side, you've got Alcibiades. He's brilliant, flamboyant, and just wildly ambitious. A general who cared way more for personal glory than for tradition. Alcibiades' political genius was in how he framed his argument. He knew just how to tap into that restless spirit of Athens after years of defensive war. He basically presented imperial expansion not as a choice, but as a matter of pure survival. To stand still, he argued, was to invite destruction. And this clash of leadership styles, it all came to a head in 415 BC. That's when Alcibiades proposed the most audacious military campaign in Athenian history, a full-scale invasion of the island of Sicily. The political maneuvering here was just disastrous. Alcibiades sold the whole invasion as this glorious path to riches. Nicias, trying to stop it, made a fatal mistake. He argued that, okay, if we're going to do this, we need an overwhelming force, hoping the massive price tag would scare everyone off. But it had the exact opposite effect. The sheer scale of what he proposed just captured their imagination, and they voted for it with even more enthusiasm. The whole campaign was just cursed from the start. Just as the fleet arrived, Alcibiades gets recalled to face charges of sacrilege, but rather than face trial, he defects to the enemy, Sparta, and tells them everything about Athens' war plans. This left the cautious, risk-averse Nicias in sole command. For months, he just hesitated. Finally, in 413 BC, with his army weakened and trapped, he prepared to retreat. And then, the moon turned red. Nicias, who was known to be morbidly superstitious, saw the lunar eclipse as a terrible omen. His priests told him to wait. So, at the most critical moment, when escape was still possible, he ordered the entire army to stay put for nearly a month, 27 days. That single decision, fueled by pure superstition, was the death warrant for the Athenian army. Those 27 days gave the enemy just enough time to reinforce, regroup, and completely trap the Athenian fleet in the harbor of Syracuse. This delay led directly to one of the most complete and horrifying defeats in the history of ancient warfare. The moment of reckoning had arrived, not on an open battlefield, but in a chaotic, inescapable trap.
The historian Thucydides, who wrote the history of the war, used a specific Greek word to describe the feeling of the final battle: thorobos. It means more than just noise. It's the complete sensory and emotional chaos that just shatters an army's will to fight. Think about it. The Athenians' greatest strength was their navy's skill in open water. But here, they were penned into the tight space of the great harbor. Their ships couldn't maneuver, they couldn't ram, they couldn't outflank anybody. Their biggest tactical advantage was completely gone.
And maybe the most heartbreaking part is that the Athenian land army was forced to watch this whole thing from the shore. Thucydides describes them like a crowd at a sporting event, just swaying with the battle, crying out in terror as they watched their friends being slaughtered, totally helpless to do anything.
In the end, it was that thorobos that sealed their fate. The noise was so immense, the crashing of ships, the screams, the conflicting orders, that commanders' shouts couldn't even be heard. Discipline just vanished, reason collapsed, and the Athenian fleet was utterly annihilated.
This wasn't just a military loss. The Sicilian Expedition was a self-inflicted wound so deep that the Athenian Empire would basically bleed out over the next decade. It would never, ever recover its former glory. The totality of the disaster was just staggering. Athens lost nearly its entire fighting force, over 200 ships, and that vast treasury it had spent decades building up. But most importantly, it lost its reputation of being invincible, which pretty much guaranteed its ultimate defeat in the Peloponnesian War.
So it leaves us with this fundamental question about leadership, doesn't it? Was Athens doomed by the reckless ambition of Alcibiades, who pushed them into the gamble? Or was it doomed by the paralyzing caution of Nicias, who made sure they would lose it? It's a dilemma that shows just how easily the line between boldness and recklessness, and between caution and paralysis, can lead a great power to ruin.